Hey guys, kinggath here, and in this guide we're going to go over special units. So I've mentioned special units in many a video in this playlist, and this is the first time we're going to cover it properly. The goal in this particular guide is to show you how to recruit new special units most of the time and talk about some of the difference and purpose of special units versus your general soldier. So the idea originally behind special units was to provide a way that faction packs could add more variety to your army, to add things like robots and creatures and vertebrates and other things that maybe wouldn't fit the typical soldier role. So most of the factions are made by some human with various gear and names that match the faction, but other than that, there's not a whole lot of difference between them. You guys know from playing this game that most NPCs tend to fight approximately the same way, depending on their weapon alone. Not a lot goes on differently beyond that. Where an exception comes into play is when you get into the different races. So for example, we've got this Protectron running in front of me. The Protectron will fight quite a bit differently than a human just by their speed alone, much less whatever weapons they have available. So this gives faction packs an opportunity to introduce some more variety, but it also gives them opportunities to introduce new alterations and varieties in the gameplay itself for Conqueror. So beyond just combat and flavor, they also can do things like give cheaper units that maybe are less effective, things that require less wages, rations, and equipment, or units that don't require beds, or units that are only designed to be workers. All of this is possible with this system. You'll definitely want to check with the faction pack page to determine how their special units work. Something we just failed to do at launch, and it's something I will rectify in a patch in the future, is to add an in-game method for the faction pack authors to display all of that information. I mean, many of them have probably figured out ways, any of them who have any scripting capability have probably figured out ways, but I think there should have been a way by default to show that information. That is something that's on our long-term list to add, though it's likely that many faction packs who have been long released have likely not gotten support in a while, are not going to get those updates either. So again, I would always recommend checking the mod page for the faction pack if you're curious exactly how a particular special unit works. But if you don't find any documentation on things like wages, rations, equipment, or whether they require a bed, assume they do have all of the same rules that a default soldier follows under, because by default that is the case. They do not default to nothing. They default to the same requirements as a general soldier, and then it's up to the faction pack to override those rules. So they can change the rules, which can allow you to build your army in different ways. The special units were kind of our RTS answer. So when you think about something like StarCraft, where you have, you've got your basic troop, like if you're playing humans, you have the Marines, but you also have things like SCVs, which are only workers, and you have, things like your dropships and your siege tanks. You have all these cool units that have specific and unique effects, and the special units fill that role. There are ways to do that. Now, as I mentioned in the soldier ranks video, special units at the time of this recording cannot rank up, but that is something we're looking to add in the future. It just would unfortunately require a lot of editing by all of the faction packs, and so if we do it, we want to do it in a way that doesn't force a lot of old faction packs to break, or in a way that forces a bunch of old faction packs to suddenly have to do a bunch of work that's unnecessary. So it's kind of one of those things I'm not releasing or adding until we have found a good happy medium way to do it, to where it can impact things minimally, because I don't like releasing features that break content that exists in the community if I can avoid it. So this particular special unit, this is the Robot Soldier, and this is done in the Rust Devils faction pack included with the Industrial City add-on. And if you see here, they have a warrior menu. So just like the general soldiers, they have access to the same menu, except because currently they cannot rank up, their rank will just show their special unit name as defined by the faction pack, and their progress will always be 0%. But you can still change their role. Now, roles are another place the faction packs can determine they can prevent them from being certain roles or force them to only be one role. They can also choose the default role. So, using that example of something like an SCV from StarCraft, if somebody wanted to make a worker-specific role that maybe provided extra resources but could only be a worker, they could do so in their faction pack definitions. So all of this stuff is possible. We want to give as much freedom as possible, but for the most part, if a special unit was just assigned by the faction pack author as just, as Unit X, for example, in Jammer's questline with the Raiders, we've given you access access to a bunch of different units, and for the most part we allow them all to be anything, but there are exceptions to that where it makes no sense mechanically, or I would say lore wise. So for example, at some point you learn to capture dogs and you train them to be war animals, and obviously then they can't be workers. Doesn't make any sense, but it does make total sense for them to go on attacks with you or to guard your settlement, and so they can be most roles, but worker just didn't make sense for them. And so that would be, oops, I just turned this guy into a guard, that's fine. But so for the most part, unless a faction pack specifically excludes a unit from acting in a certain role, they should have all rules available, in the same way that by default they will just use the default rules for the amount of resources required to operate them. Speaking of resources, that is another place the faction packs have control. So most of the time the recruitment of them will be done through the ham radio. There are exceptions. Like I mentioned, the raider dogs, those are recruited in a very specific in-game way that you have to do something with your player character, but most of the faction packs tend to lean on this recruitment system here in the ham radio. So if we go to manage recruitment and we go to the recruit special units tab, you will see this screen, and I'm going to describe how this works. So at the top, it's just the label, Recruit Special Units. Next is the current unit that you would be recruiting if you use some of these options. Next is the cost, and that's in those resources. So if you're not familiar with the recruitment resources, you should go way back to the beginning of the playlist and look at the recruiting soldiers. It's the same resource system, uses the same pool of resources. So the cost of resources from that pool. And if you go down to the, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 6th line, available resources, that tells you how many resources in total your faction has available for you to pull from. Next up, we have queued for recruitment. That's how many special units of this type would be recruited the next time recruitment occurs. They do apply towards your daily cap. So again, going back to that recruiting soldiers video, in the default number is you can recruit up to 5 new soldiers every day. So if you have any special units queued up, they always supersede the baseline soldiers, assuming that needs are met for them. And I'll talk about that in a second, but that's the number we have queued up for this unit. Currently available, that's how many of the special unit we've already got in our faction. And then again, the available resources, the total resources we have available. And now you can use the next and previous to cycle through the different special units. And this particular faction pack at the time of this recording, or at least with the version I have installed, only had the one. Go check the mod page, Industrial City, to find out if there are additional. So you can cycle between them, and it will always give you the same screen telling you the unit, how much it costs, how many you have, and how many are queued. Then we have queue for recruitment. If we select this, it will add another to the queue. It will reduce our available resources, and now we have 3 available next time we do recruitment, or we'll have 3 more get recruited the next time we do recruitment. So any special units will always supersede the normal units. And if you have more than 5 queued, it will just do them in the order the special unit appears in the faction pack's definition. So for example, if let's say a faction had 3 special units, the first one that you see when you load into this recruit special unit menu, that's considered the first one. All of those will get recruited before the next one, and it just goes in order like that. In the future, we're going to probably introduce some sort of more visual recruitment system. I love the idea of having something more akin to an RTS where you can see kind of a build of like little icons, and where you could interject them in different orders. So maybe you want 2 of special unit 1 and then 1 of the 3rd type, etc. I would love to have a system like that, but it's going to require a massive UI overhaul that I just don't know how to do yet. So you just got to give me time to learn Flash or recruit a Flash developer, which are hard to find these days given how obsolete that technology is. So the next up is cancel from queue, and this does the exact opposite of queue for recruitment. This will just remove one from the queue and restore those resources. And then lastly, you have return to recruit menu, which will go back to the other menu where you can donate resources once again. And it can take a moment for that to pop back up. So the recruit special units is very easy. This is the most common way you'll do it for most faction packs. And if you're finding that you're never recruiting special units, even though they say they're queued, it's likely because the cost for that particular unit is higher in the wages, rations, and equipment, and that you are short those. So some of them might require, extra equipment, but no rations. That's a common thing for robot units. And so you would want to check that is not displayed on the screen. And that's mostly just due to UI limitations. We're only capable of sending so many numbers to any individual message screen. And so sending all of that data to the screen would overload it and would take away all of our flexibility to do things in the future. So we just don't show it here. So you'll want to check out the special units on the faction pack authors page. In the future, and I mentioned this earlier, or maybe I mentioned in a previous recording, but in the future we will add a new button here that's, you know, about this special unit, where faction pack authors can individually define all the information they need without it needing to be dynamic. So I'll add something like that in the future for some faction pack authors to use, which will give them the ability to put all of that stuff that's documented on their mod pages in the mod, but at the time of this recording that is not available. So if you suddenly see a new option here, it might cover a lot of these issues that I'm talking about. So if you're not getting those recruits, it's almost certainly because your meters down in the bottom right there are not full, or your special unit maybe requires a bed and you don't have enough. So keep in mind that your special units generally, unless defined otherwise by the faction pack author, are following all the same rules for recruitment as your default soldiers. So I think that covers most of what you need to know about special units. By default, they act just like normal soldiers. They're just a little bit more flavorful, and they can't rank up, and you've got to manually recruit them. But there is so much power in that system, the faction pack authors can basically do whatever they dream up with them, especially once you start factoring in the ability to script certain things. I've opened up the scripting system, or the faction control system, so that they can inject just about anything they want. They can even bypass a lot of the rules I've talked about. So people with anybody doing faction packs with a strong coding background could probably pull off some pretty crazy stuff. So I would definitely encourage you guys to go check out the details of the faction pack you're playing with to make sure you understand all about their special units. But I think this covers basically what to expect from them, and where you go recruiting them, which is going to be here. And they should generally, if they're attackable units, or if they're units that are meant to attack and you have the warrior role for them, you will be able to use them in your raid system, which you can learn about in the Advanced Assaults video, which is earlier in this playlist.